Hi, this is John Wilcock, and this is your weekly Usually Travel show. Wait a minute. Hi, it's right on the New Year as I tape this, and the world's at war again, as it always is. I went to see a friend of mine who claims to never get involved in current affairs. He thinks that everything that you can't see, touch and feel and hear is totally irrelevant. He doesn't own a television set. He reads newspapers rarely, and if then only on the internet. I only happened to mention the current Israeli-Palestine Hamas trouble when he was ranting and raging. For somebody who doesn't get involved in this thing, he certainly has very strong opinions, all the usual things about how the Israelis stole the Palestinians' land and all the rest, the Palestinians' land and all the rest of it. Now, it seems to me that if you live in a country and you're constantly being inundated with rockets to kill everybody, or kill everybody within range, that it's only practical to fight back. And the argument seems to be that the Israeli response to Hamas is overdone. Now, I wonder what is allowable when somebody's lobbing rockets at you. Are you allowed to send one plane and one bomb? I mean, the whole thing is kind of ridiculous. You've got to fight back. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't a lot of faults on the side of the rather over-aggressive Israelis, but also there was a grand opportunity for Hamas, or the people living in Gaza, to live their lives, you know, and build a community and make some sense out of their lives. But instead they chose to think they ought to wipe out this adjoining country. And my friend's allegations that the Israelis stole the Palestinians' land, well, I don't know too much about history, but it seems to me that the Israelis have a reasonable case for stating that biblical references to them living on that land long ago. But anyway, it's all so tiring, all this constant argument, and I suppose that's something that never will be settled, although at one time I used to think that the battle between the Brits and the Irish would never be settled. Sooner or later it did come to pass. All that's by the way. There are so many other things. 2008 was not a good year for me. I had written my autobiography and I was trying to sell it, and I was trying to find an agent. And agents, I don't know if you've ever tried to deal with literary agents, but they're basically impossible. Everything should be written exactly the way they think it should, to exactly their standards. And the standard mantra is, memoirs don't sell. What they want is, if you write a memoir at all, which I suppose mine is, it's a story of my life, what they want is something like Angela's Ashes, that classic book of 20 years ago in which he talked about his terrible, unhappy childhood and how miserable everything was and how he overcame it and all the rest. And mine is basically a reportorial book. It's factual, and true, it's not emotional enough, or so the agents say, but I'm not an emotional type. I mean, I'm a reporter, you know, and I reported most of the details of my interesting life. Incidentally, when I sat and wrote this thing, it was in a town in Ireland called Carlingford, which I'll show you a bit of later in the tape. So I had no problem. I found it totally impossible to sell this book, and of course I'm still selling it. I did serialize it on my website, which is ohiorange.com, and which I now will very soon will start serializing my biography of Andy Warhol, I think. But you know, theoretically, the new year is going to be better. We always hope. So I start 2009 feeling relatively optimistic. I'm going to start with taking a cruise through the Panama Canal, which will be a few subsequent tapes, I suppose, on this particular website. And what I plan to do is, I plan in this show, as in others, to recycle some of my very old tapes, which are already obsolete and getting more so. These were 8mm tapes. I mean, nobody can even play those anymore. I had to get an old camera to be able to play them and dub them. and I'm dubbing them onto VHS, which is now also obsolete and going out. So I've got hundreds of shows that I'm going to have to throw away unless I can dub them onto CDs, which I suppose someday will also be obsolete, DVDs, whatever. Anyway, so I'll be showing various chunks of stuff I did, sometimes as much as 20 years ago, and I'm not quite sure what yet, but the next 2 or 3 shows will probably be that, although I will then show my wanderings when I went on the Panama Canal trip. We're going to stop in Guatemala and Mexico and Costa Rica and stuff like that. The reason why I leave so often is I live in the tiny town of Ojai, where public access is about to disappear, although it may re-emerge. And I get bored. It's a small place and it's lovely, and I love living here, but it's kind of boring, so I leave a lot and travel. There were 3 horses outside.
It certainly looked like they're well taken care of. They're there.
Actually have taken a shot of music. I should actually have taken a shot of heaven, which is what the house is called, from further back. It's prominently on this hill overlooking the surroundings. I'll show you from the house itself. Last time I came it was such a big party. They had John Long and a bunch of people handling the cars, but this time I'm able to park right next to the house. Larry's there videotaping people as they come in that other door. Long corridor. I came in at that door there. Huge kitchen and bar. Here's the kitchen. We interviewed Larry in here once. And that's the famous John Long there.
Yeah, right.
A glass of champagne to begin with.
As well as I do, that once it's recorded, it's everybody's property.
Oh, right, okay.
And so I'm leery of letting anything go, but I might.
Zandra Road. I love your shoes with the
Thank you.
heels about 6 inches high. Isn't it hard to walk with heels that high?
No.
Well, now she just had a hip replacement, right?
You're used to it by now, yeah.
3 years ago was the last one, so.
How many have you had?
Thunder and lightning, these two dogs. Larry says he doesn't know which is which.
He's coming over to try it again.
They nuzzle
they
you.
are so identical.
They nuzzle you all the time. I'll show you the room. For the big parties, the pool is covered over so people don't fall in, of course. The view from heaven. I told Xandra we met in London once for some kind of opening, and I had picked up a magazine and she was on the cover, and I went to this opening and there she was. I just really freaked out. As you doubtless know, Larry's mother was the fabulous, famous Mary Martin. Various hats hang on the walls, usually kind of Western. And there's a very pretty fountain out here. I just talked to Larry about how we have to sit down sometime and do a proper, not really interview, but kind of conversation. I've been meaning to get it done for years. Just talking about everything, politics and his background, his history. There's so many things we can talk about, but we'll get it done sooner or later. Madge, his wife, designed this beautiful house. There she is. There she is. And there she is. And there's the family. Somebody was telling me they stayed up there once in the little room up there.
There you go. Good for you. He did? You're taking good, smart girl. That was good.
Did this frighten you at all? No, you don't have stage fright.
No, we did a tour with him. Do you know Planet?
All right, girls. There. Somebody
And there are rooms here that I never even explored on previous visits. Not to mention the upstairs where I've never been, where there must be dozens more rooms, I suppose. That's nice, isn't it? I really like stained glass. This beautifully carved cabinet holds DVDs. A little pond outside, the other side of the hot tub, which in turn abuts the pool.
They had a little something to do at the Nokia Theater last night. Has anybody ever been to the Nokia Theater?
place. In fact, a guy at one of the bed and breakfast places told me that tourists find it only by accident. The border to Northern Ireland is not very far north. It's only about 12 miles to Newry up there. And Newry itself is 6 or 7 miles into Northern Ireland. That's King John's Castle there, named after a visit by England's King John in the year 1210. Can you imagine that? It's almost 1,000 years ago, and that castle was already in existence in those days. One of the things I read about Carlingford is that it was once a major fishing port on this coast, and basically a port of all kinds. But industry never kind of took up here after the ports further to the south became more important, and as a result it's preserved a lot of what would otherwise have been destroyed. There are actually several medieval buildings here and there in the town, or remains of same. That's Taft's house. It was a kind of fortified house that a typical rich merchant would build for himself. That's a medieval building, but I don't know what year. Anyway, Carlingford. You'll like it. And what brings me to such a relatively remote place, you might ask? The answer is simple. I have one contact in Dublin, and I asked him to find me a very quiet, untroubled place where I could work and not have any distractions, basically. What I wanted to do was bring a pile of stuff which is about this high, which I had stored from the 60s and 70s, and I just had to move. That's forced me to go into it and made me realize that I'll never get rid of it unless I write about it. And so I came here to work on my autobiography. I brought a power book, no printer, and a bag full of stuff to go through. And I'm sitting here, and every day I do a bit of work. It's a fairly simple routine. I get up in the morning and I walk out. Unfortunately, you can buy the London papers, so I buy the Daily Telegraph, take a little walk, go back, have a coffee, sit and work, read the paper, make myself some lunch, go out to the post office, and then walk around a bit and go back and work some more. The only entertainment in this place are the pubs. There's about half a dozen streets and about 7 pubs. The pubs have entertainment on Saturday nights, which means usually they have a musician in them. Not terribly interesting, but quite lively. I'm developing a taste for Guinness. Things are fairly expensive here. You'd be surprised how expensive Ireland is. Since it joined the European community, its prices have become commensurate with pretty much everywhere else. It's very hard to live on here. Once you've paid your rent, it's very hard to live for less than, say, 20 or 30 bucks a day, even in a place where there's nothing to do. And I've rented a cute little place. It's in a stone cottage. It's a little sort of tiny apartment. I'm paying 90 English pounds a week, which is much less than it normally goes for. The reason being is the landlord, Brendan, doesn't have any other tenants at the moment. Otherwise, it put me in a smaller place. I pay about 90 English pounds a week, which is approximately 140 bucks a week. But since I don't have very much to spend my money on, it's not very expensive living. And my hope is that I'll get this autobiography finished and actually get some money for it. At any rate, that's enough for the moment. More of Carlingford next. Side of this jetty wall here is the lough, L-O-U-G-H, loch, which runs out to sea down there. It's quite wide at this point, with the mountains of Mourne sloping down to the sea over there. I could sing you the song, but I won't. Narrower and narrower, and goes all the way up to Newry, 12 miles away, and that mountain one of these days, and show you the view from the top. We cut across the graveyard, which has many ancient stones but is actually still in use. And when we come out the other side, we're right opposite my little temporary home, which is here. Specifically that little door there. This gate here is called the Tholsel, and it was originally part of the old Carlingford town wall. Dates back to the 15th century. This and a tiny fragment of wall, that's all that's left of the surroundings itself. At one time it was a place where they collected tolls as people came into the town, and built into its lower wall here is what was the town jail. A rather unpleasant little room to spend time in. Into the town centre, which is here. There are, roughly speaking, about 6 streets in the town and about 7 pubs. I'm on the way along here to the best restaurant, Jordan's. Quite expensive actually. And this is the cute little post office. Open every day except Sunday. That's the street I just walked on with the town back there. Monastery for the first couple of hundred years or so, but it was abandoned by the Benedictines in the 18th century, and they moved to Dundalk about 20 miles south. So the ruins have been sitting around like this for a couple of centuries. I met an interesting woman when I was nosing around town last night. This is a town of only 650, I should point out. She's a Californian of all things. Came here a year ago to settle, and dispenses Celtic tree oils, which are very ancient, or in origin at any rate, and supposed to be very good for you. They smell terrific, and so does she. The abbey is quite barren inside. But very beautiful, I think, in its simplicity. There's the sheep, I don't know where they're going. And there's the dog, keeping them in tight formation. I'll catch him again. I got most of the way up the mountain. It's called Sleeve Foyle, but now it's starting to rain and there's absolutely no shelter whatsoever. So I'm going to have to either go down or get totally wet. I figured I'd better do the videotape here. That's Carlingford down there in the little harbour. As you can see, it's all countryside. I came all the way up the slope. Head on down. Halfway down, I've stopped to rest on a rock and drink a little of my frozen water. I freeze a bottle of water and carry it with me, and it melts at just about the right rate. There are sheep all over the hillside, and they never let me get nearer than about 50 yards, and then they quite amiably move off without panic, unlike a little rabbit that was scared and ran like crazy when I came near. Beautiful, beautiful place. Nobody around at all. Just miles and miles of mountains and sea, really. The lower slopes of the mountain are covered with this nice fern, and occasionally some rather attractive yellow flowering gorse bushes. It's a long way down. It's taken me as long to get down as it did to go up, because it's very steep, but the end is in sight. I see a gate over there, which is presumably to stop the sheep getting out and straying from the mountain. The little path back down into town is rather pretty, lined with I say blackberry bushes probably, although it's out of season at the moment. And some bright yellow flowers. Just off US 1, and if I remember rightly, the state bought this stand of trees in the next stretch from the Pacific Lumber Company to preserve them, and they didn't even have the money to do it at the time. They had to borrow the money, but otherwise I presume they would have been logged like most of the others. Most of the others, obviously all the trees don't get logged. But they're definitely giants. Some trees are 300 feet high, I understand. The sign itself, you can tell how wide they are at points. That's like at least 6 feet across that. Okay. Okay. Well, this is John Wilcock. This is your weekly show, Wait a Minute.